Welcome to the Andrew Michael Metter podcast. I'm Andrew Michael Metter. I'm here with a legendary scientist, George Kramer. George, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for inviting me on this show. I'm Georgiana Kramer, but everybody calls me George. I work at the Planetary Science Institute, and I am pretty much I am a professional lunatic. Is actually the job title that I prefer. I study the moon almost exclusively, and it's a great place, and it's a lot more interesting than you might think. I would like to say very briefly that today is June 10th, 2020, and today is Scientists Strike for Black Lives. And so a lot of scientists are observing this day in solidarity with our Black, brown, and whatever else brothers and sisters who we support and love. So this is my form of participating while striking at the same time.
Great. Thanks for bringing that up. So the first question that I want us to think about to get our conversation rolling is I want to talk about the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. And it basically says that it was created by the UN, and they said that space and celestial bodies are the province of all mankind, meaning that there's no way for a government or a national entity to claim sovereignty. So even though we have a flag on the moon, that doesn't mean the land is US soil,
Right.
right? And so that means if we go to Mars, it's not just first come, first serve.
Right, absolutely.
But when it comes to mining the moon, which there is increasing news and publicity about, is that first come, first serve for industries? How is that going to work? If the US is there first and China's there as well, and we're competing for the mining, do you have any thoughts on that?
Um, I guess this is like the difference between corporations and government, right? And I honestly don't really follow space policy very much, but my understanding is that um, we are still meant to treat this outer space like Antarctica, effectively, in that it's for everyone. And fortunately, although I would say fortunately, Antarctica has actually been protected in this sense, where corporate institutions don't get to go there and start mining it or doing whatever they want. But the moon and the rest of the solar system doesn't have that protection, and it's probably that might be the right thing to do. Actually, we like to believe that capitalism or whatever form of corporate entity wants to take is going to go and do the right thing, and go out and they're going to use the resources that are available, mine the resources, use them to further explore and to further conquer the galaxy. But and hopefully they won't be leaving just destruction and detritus in their wake. But um, um, who knows what's going to happen? I think that addressing your question directly, though, I think what's going to wind up happening is corporations are going to stake holds in certain places, and you can't really say that they're American corporations or Chinese corporations or what have you, because while they might be from America, they're not representing America. They're representing their corporation and their own corporate interests. Just as a lot of corporations will send jobs to another country or start manufacturing something in another country or put their money in another country where there's less taxes and such, that's the same. In the same way, they might be an American company, but that doesn't really mean they're not America. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's fascinating. I've never thought of it like that. I guess I've always thought like, oh, that's an American company. So what do you like? Are you for mining on the moon? Are you pro mining?
Yeah, I am pro mining because I mean, a lot of people say like, oh, don't destroy the moon, don't ruin, its environment and such. But look, I mean, you know, this isn't a vacuum. There's no life forms on it. There's no way that there's going to be life forms on it unless we make it the kind of environment that there would be. The only way we can really ruin the moon is, in my opinion at least, is if we deface its its front side. I've heard some people talk about, like, somewhat jokingly, and I've also heard people talk about it not jokingly, which kind of frightens me, is, for example, having Coca-Cola put their logo, scrape their logo onto the front side of the moon, so that then when it's a full moon, that's what we're seeing. That is horrifying to me. That would be how we deface it. But it wouldn't be like we're going to go there and start killing off species. It's not like we're going to go there and start making the environment inhospitable, or for anything, because it's already the worst place you could possibly imagine in the solar system. So yeah, as far as mining on the moon goes, I think it's if the goal is to go to Mars, if the goal is to go beyond and really start going beyond our own planet and living out in the solar system, then the moon is the most logical place to go and get resources from, because there is a lot of evidence that there's at least some water, or some, and there's certainly forms of oxygen that we can easily get out of the soil, combine it with hydrogen, which the sun is throwing at the surface of the moon all the time, and we have water, and we can take this water, and this is the most critical resource that we need to go and explore the rest of the solar system as human beings. So we can get this from the moon, and we can do it without defacing the moon as well. For the most part.
So the hydrogen, you're talking about solar winds, correct?
Yeah.
So I watched one of your lectures on lunar swirls and was fascinated by it.
Thank you.
And so the lunar dew, or moon dew,
Space dew, yeah.
Space dew. So one question I had was, does that dew stay on the surface? How does it evaporate and then come back and stay on the moon?
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I know some scientists are upset at me for calling it space dew, and of course it hasn't really taken off, because saying evaporate is really the wrong word, because that involves an atmosphere and such. So, in the case of space dew, and that's spelled DEW, space dew, is that we have the solar wind is coming in, it's throwing its protons, which are charged hydrogen atoms, at the lunar surface. And the surface of the moon has some, when you break some of the minerals, especially on the moon, there's a lot of silicates, and these silicates have a lot of oxygen in them. And when those mineral surfaces are broken, there's these oxygen atoms that have what we call them, they're unsatisfied bonds. And oxygen would like to be negatively charged. So basically you have this, when it's oxygen is, when it's bonded with something in a molecule, it has a negative charge to it that is satisfied with other positive charges from other atoms. So if you break that and you have these oxygens that are on the surface, they will have like a net negative charge. And so that would attract these hydrogen atoms. And so you could have these hydrogen protons, excuse me, these charged hydrogen atoms that come and like kind of stick to the oxygen, the negatively charged oxygen. It's a really, really weak bond. It's sometimes it's called adsorption or hydrogen bonding, but it's not a completely understood phenomenon, but there's a lot of evidence that this happens. And so this is, again, these protons from the sun come and they kind of stick to these surfaces. But if the thermal energy is too high, like at lunar noon or like during the middle of the day on the moon, the thermal energy is too high and they don't stay stuck together. But as you get closer to sunset, these protons will start, thermal energy goes down and these protons start sticking. And then lunar night comes and they're stuck together because they don't really have any energy that's driving them apart. So they're hanging out together. And then they go into the night and they probably stay together all night long. And when lunar dawn begins, the thermal energy comes and starts driving them off again. And we see evidence for this from a few different instruments now, first from the Moon Mineralogy Mapper and the epoxy, which is the rebirth of deep impact, and also Cassini, when these last two satellites flew by the moon. And then again with some of the instruments from Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, they're seeing this phenomenon is occurring. So that's why I call it space dew, because it's kind of like, it's like the moisture is sticking at night and stays throughout the night, and then in the morning it starts to disassociate, not really evaporate, but disassociate.
Gotcha. Yeah. So what you're saying is that a hydrogen that's stuck at lunar dawn isn't the same hydrogen atom that's stuck at lunar dusk. Is that what
Um,
you're saying?
right. Yeah. Yeah, that would be right. And there's models that predict that, these um, when the hydrogen atoms like disassociate, that they kind of wind up moving in a random direction, but it's like a kind of a hopping pattern. They'll take off and then they'll land again somewhere else and take off again. And if you think about this all happening randomly, as they go further towards the poles, though, even in a random motion, as they go further towards the poles, it gets colder near there at about plus and minus 60 degrees latitude, such that they stop moving so much. And so there's models that predict that this is one way that we might be trapping ice up at the polar regions.
Wow.
Yeah.
And are the solar winds constant?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not that it's always on the same side of the moon. It's always on one side of the moon, just like the sun shines on one side of the earth. As it rotates, though, it will go on all sides.
All right, so let's suppose that we're mining the moon and we mine it into oblivion. I know that the moon is not it's not entirely titanium, it's not entirely precious metals. But let's just say the moon is gone.
Okay.
So one thought that I had was taking into account the Pacific trash monster, I think that's what it's called.
Yeah, okay.
Of plastic. So what if we took all of our plastic hunk and replaced the moon with an equivalent mass so that it wouldn't affect our tides, it wouldn't affect any of the benefits of having the moon, but we got all the resources from the moon and we just replaced it with plastic junk. What do you see, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the good news here is that I don't think we have enough plastic junk to do that. I think I can't say for sure. I think we have enough plastic junk to reach the moon and come back and go back and forth a few times, but we'd have to make the equivalent mass, right? That's the most important thing, is that we'd have to make the equivalent mass. And I think that plastic is pretty close, maybe a little less denser than water. I'm not sure, but it's roughly about 1 cc, 1 gram per cubic centimeter, while the moon is closer to 3.5. So we'd have to have something that would be, like 3.5 times the volume. So it would be a much, much larger moon, just so that we could still have that same mass, so that we could still have the same kind of tides and such.
Right, and so then it would have to be further away, correct, to have the
Uh,
equivalent
no,
have a
because
same.
if it was further, well, so I think, if I understand correctly, really it's about where the center of mass is. So the center, it would still have to be in the same location. It might actually start getting weird if it gets that. I don't think it would have to be that. I don't think it would get large enough, however, for it to, such that the surface would be so close to the surface of the moon would be so close to the surface of the Earth that it would be weird like that. But so yes, it would have to be in the same location, or if it was to be further away, then it would have to start becoming a more massive moon, even more massive.
So if we've got this artificial moon, are you okay with defacing it? Can corporations put billboards
I'm
on
not
that?
okay with that. No,
Okay.
I'm not okay with that, because I don't want to be forced to look up I mean, it's the moon, for Pete's sake, right? I mean, I wouldn't want to have to look up in any portion of the sky at any time and be forced to see a giant banner that's like, taking up most of my view. But the moon is a really special, piece of I was going to say real estate, but that's really the wrong word to use there. Um, it's a special thing for all of us, and I think that anybody who seriously has the idea of defacing the moon's surface, such that, especially at full moon, it is advertising something, it's deplorable. It's the.
Mm.
I mean, go do whatever you want to the far side, because we don't know what it looks like anyway. No, I'm just kidding. We know what it looks like. Don't do that.
So with that artificial moon idea, it's been in the news that China wants to put as many as up to three artificial moons, moon-like satellites, and the figure is that they could save $173 million in electrical costs if they use that as an artificial nightlight. So instead of using electricity to light street poles. They're going to put these moons into orbit.
So
What are your
for
thoughts on
so
that?
for so I mean, is it just going to be China that's going to be illuminated at night? Is it going to be geostationary?
Right. So that's it said they were going to orbit the Earth, so not geostationary,
Ah, okay.
which my big idea with that was that it's obviously going to have an impact on other countries.
Yeah.
So how
I don't know. I think this is where Star Wars comes into play. And I mean, like Reagan's Star Wars, you know, shoot them out of the sky. No, I mean, that would be horrible. We wouldn't have night, or we wouldn't have, I mean, it's already bad enough that, the cities illuminate the earth so much that we can't have a proper dark sky to make, astronomical observations. But now if we had night lights in the sky constantly, that would be that much. I can't believe that they're serious about that. That's wow. I don't know.
yeah,
Bad
it
idea.
seems like there could be easier solutions that weren't so like that wouldn't affect the entirety
like
of
like having like huge solar farms that could then just produce that at nighttime, then stores the energy, and then at nighttime it can produce all the lights they want, and they can keep it in China, or whoever in China wants to have those lights near them. But yeah.
Yeah, so they did say that it would be 1/5 the brightness or the luminosity of normal streetlights, and I didn't really understand how that would be better.
Yeah, I don't, unless it's more streetlights. I mean, I think the moon, when it's a full moon and the sky is not cloudy, that's already rivaling a streetlight, or not, if not brighter, right?
Hmm.
But that's just one. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. That's very strange. I haven't
Yeah,
seen that.
I would say I'm also against that, like the defacing or putting billboards up in space, putting it on the moon.
I was
Uh,
going to ask you, yeah, how you felt about that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm someone that I am a huge advocate of biodiversity conservation, of natural park preservation. I think we need to keep things the way they are. Um, I think of it like if you were getting an organ transplant, all of the metal structures and all of the buildings that we're putting on the earth, all of our infrastructure, it kind of seems like a foreign body. And I just feel like at some point the earth is going to reject it, and I want to live in natural, sustainable infrastructure. I want I want to work with the earth. I don't want to just do our thing.
Yeah.
Because I think part of it is like even though I'm so grateful for my house and shelter, it causes us to feel really separated from the earth.
Hmm.
We can feel like there's this mass idea that the earth is just there to be subjected, not to be valued, not to be cared for. Um, and I guess if we had that attitude, I guess I feel like we would be in a much better place, pollution wise, conservation wise.
So this is what gives me solace. So believe me, I am no advocate for destroying the earth, using all of its resources, and because ultimately, what's going to happen? We're not going to destroy the earth. Okay, I'm sorry, but I mean,
Right.
unless we redirect a large enough asteroid to come at our, we're not going to destroy the earth. What we are going to do is make it inhospitable for human beings, and we are well on our way to that. I actually can't remember where I had read or seen this, but we've actually been living for the last about 10,000 years in a up until very recently in this period of incredibly calm climate. Like if like looking throughout the geologic record, our climate has actually done a lot of fluctuation with temperatures, with ice ages and stuff. There's been a lot of varying fluctuation, and over the last 10,000 years, it's been actually unusually calm. Maybe even longer, maybe 20,000 or something years. And I think that personally, I think that's why civilization was able to start, is because we didn't have things that just kept destroying our attempts at civilization. And we're now putting the planet into a swing, that's going to wind up destroying it. And so the way I see it, we're like kind of at this crossroads regardless of whether we're causing it or if it's going to happen naturally, where we are intelligent enough that we could do something to make our civilization continue by stabilizing maybe this place, maybe better yet, going to other planets and stabilizing those so that they're hospitable for human beings. But this planet is, we are not, I don't think we're actually going to be able to stabilize it. This is a very strong planet, and it will do what it wants to do. And we might make it really, really awful for a lot of species and kill them off. It's true. But we are going to kill ourselves off too, long before we destroy all the other species or the Earth. And so I think that's the thing that kind of gives me solace, sort of, that no matter what we do to it, we're gonna just be killed off, and the Earth will go on.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully, I care about the human race, and I'd like us to go on. So we need to be smart about this.
Yeah, one of the courses that I teach is earth science, and so we explore, what is the Martian environment like? What is the lunar environment like? And we talk about going to other planets. I would really love for that to be a last ditch effort because I love going outside on Earth, and barring some wild progression in terraforming technology and capability, going outside on Mars is not going to be a pleasant experience. You're
Yeah,
going to be
no.
in a spacesuit. You're going to be. It's just not the same, and I want people to understand that. It's like, oh yeah, we don't just. It's not like we upgrade to Mars.
Yeah, no. We just kind of. It's very different. Another place that we could actually go to is Venus. If we went to, I think it's at about 100 kilometers altitude, I think. I might have it. I think it's 100 kilometers altitude, and it, above the surface is the temperature and pressure is ambient Earth surface. Now, granted, the atmospheric composition is not correct for us, so we would have to be still protected from that. But we could, be like outside, sort of in the Venus atmosphere at 1 atmospheric pressure, and it might feel kind of comfortable temperature-wise. So we could live there somehow.
So we would build a scaffolded civilization,
Or
100
maybe a blimp-based or something.
like Cloud City in Star Wars, where
Like, I'm
Lando.
sorry. What, oh, yeah.
I think it's called Cloud City. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest Star Wars aficionado, so, but
Are you a Trekkie?
yeah. Not enough of either, actually, to really, I guess I'm a little bit more, but still not.
So
I mean,
let's
I'm
go.
a big sci-fi fan, don't get me wrong.
Yeah. So let's go back to the mining specifically. I was running some numbers, and based off of the information off of SpaceX's website and what I could find about the market value for titanium. So a SpaceX launch at this time costs about $250 million. Like 90 million of that is reusable, and 150 is just expended. It's consumable every time. Based on the volumetric cavity and the capacity to bring titanium back, so based on the molar volume and the molar mass, at the highest market value for titanium, which is $300 per kilogram, and that's for medical use, we could only make $8 million.
Hmm.
So we spend 250 million to launch, and we get 8 million from the titanium.
But that doesn't include like the resources that you need on the lunar surface to do the mining and such, does it?
Correct. No, it doesn't include the wage and labor fees for the miners, or if it's robots, the R&D to develop those robots, um, the the cost of the electrolysis to keep the humans alive, the resources for the base, everything that's going into it, for $8 million per payload.
Yeah, I guess in my mind, I don't see the value of mining the moon and certainly, especially asteroids, um, um, for
Mm.
anything other than just using them to build spacecraft or to supply spacecraft for further exploration of the solar system. I don't. And let me just put something to rest for any of your viewers out there who might be thinking, oh, well, look at, there's all those like precious metals and such that are inside of asteroids. You would have to literally pulverize and destroy that asteroid and sieve it for all of its particles to get the resources, these precious metal resources out of it. There's no it takes a planet like Earth that recycles its crust and starts what's the word um, segregating, I guess, like the metals, the not just the metals, but the elements in general that it doesn't want to put into normal minerals like our like quartz and whatever else. It's after these minerals are being created over and over and over again, and it keeps putting the minerals it doesn't want like being left over and left over. Stuff like gold and platinum and such like that don't want to really go into any normal minerals. So um, once those elements are just put into like left behind, that's when you finally start getting veins and mineable ore that has that doesn't happen on asteroids. It doesn't happen on the moon. It doesn't happen on Mars. Might happen on Venus, but we have really no idea what's going on there. So yeah, mining asteroids for precious metals isn't really a thing. Now, mining iron asteroids like Psyche, for instance, which is like the core of a disrupted planetesimal. That's yes, okay. There's a bunch of iron for you, but we're not going to be mining a bunch of platinum and such like that out of asteroids.
Mhm. So, because we're in the clutches of COVID right now, one question that I had was, do you think it's possible that novel viruses or bacteria are living on asteroids and other celestial bodies, and if we brought them to Earth and mined them, we could transmit those vectors to humanity?
I am like the furthest thing away from a biologist, but um, I would say no. That's not possible. I think that the most complex thing that we've been able to find on comets or asteroids or meteorite particles are just complex sugars. So it's just sort of like the beginning of life. And I mean, the beginning particles that could start coming together to become life. I also don't subscribe to the idea that asteroids brought these things to the surface of the Earth, because if they could be created on asteroids, they could be created here on Earth too. So we don't really need those things to be brought here. I think the Earth was fully capable of creating those things itself, and already in an environment that would have been more suitable for them to keep doing what they were doing, or continue to replicate, or bond, or whatever. Whereas on an asteroid, they kind of couldn't do much of anything since the environment was already thermally pretty low.
So
Um,
you don't buy into the idea that life was seeded onto Earth?
Not unless it was intelligent.
All right. So back to the moon base. So let's say we think $8 million is worth it per payload, and we do the math and we find out that the volume of titanium on the moon would would net us a profit of money from mining.
Okay.
So now we're doing all this development and research into building a moon base. I learned from your lecture that I watched that the moon is predominantly basalt. Is that
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Which is a volcanic rock. And I was curious, do you think that we would be able to use the basalt to build bases, or would we have to build our own materials, or I'm sorry, bring our own materials to the moon?
Well, I should back up a little. So the moon is this the moon's crest at least is predominantly it's actually predominantly a single mineral it's plagioclase. And so we call the rock that it's made of anorthite, um, and I'm sorry, anorthosite. And but plagioclase is one of the minerals that's in basalt, so that's why it's kind of basalt. But all the dark areas that we see are definitely, those are basalt. Same stuff we have in the ocean floor, make up Hawaii, Galapagos, all that. Although a little tailored to being in a really dry environment like the moon. um, yes, I have certainly seen presentations from companies and that are working on using the moon to create our bases using the regolith, the surface of the moon, the like the already ground up soil to make habitats for us. I mean, I think that of course some of the initial ones at least would have to be brought over, like maybe inflatable habitats for us to stay in, because it would take some time to form other ones. And also living in lava caves would be an excellent, probably the best way for us to protect at least life forms, humans.
So I think of the expenditure required, like we're literally building from scratch, building an environment that we could live in and work in. Would we send would we train astronauts to mine, or would we train miners to be astronauts?
It's a good question. I guess, I mean, if I had to guess the best way to do it, it would probably be to um, train astronauts to manipulate, repair, and work with robots that would do the actual, manual labor. Yeah, I think it would be, especially like if they had to work, out in the lack of atmosphere in a spacesuit, I think that that's just prohibitive to actually doing any sort of um, mining work that would be labor and like physically intensive. I think just moving around is already physically intensive enough. But I know that they're working now on robotic and human interactions for going to the lunar surface, using like robot automation and with human guidance and human interaction. So I think it would probably be best to have the astronauts be trained to do those things. But I certainly wouldn't rule out the idea that some more highly trained miners, especially that are familiar with working with mining equipment like that, would also be trained to go initially, and at least, since they would already have that expertise.
Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about the exhaustion, like that makes me think of, if you're doing physical work or labor, your need for oxygen increases, and oxygen doesn't exist on the moon in the form of breathable oxygen and atmosphere, because there is no atmosphere. So that would greatly reduce the duration of time that you could be there, and it would increase the cost because of the increase in the number of flights to send materials there.
Well, the good news is, as if they're mining materials, like if say they're mining the regolith, the surface fragmented material, and they are actually melting it to make pavement, to make habitats, to make whatever things they're intending to do. When they melt it, they're going to drive off oxygen. So they just need to capture that oxygen, and they got their oxygen. There's gobs and gobs of oxygen on the lunar surface, actually. It's just tied up as rock. But you start melting that stuff, and there's your oxygen.
Hmm. Do we currently have scientific processes to be able to harvest that oxygen?
I think so, yeah. But that is outside of my pay grade.
Hmm. And that's like that oxygen, is that the hydroxyl, the OH?
No, it would be O2. I mean, it would be coming off as just normal oxygen. So the oxygens are bonded to mostly silica, and also or silicon, excuse me, and also um, like iron, magnesium, calcium, and such like that. But it is oxygen is the most abundant element that's in the crust.
Are the silicas present in plagioclase?
Yeah, and pyroxene and also olivine. Those are like the three most abundant minerals and those are also the minerals that make up basalt, which is why I say the moon is made of basalt.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of gathering it and bringing it back, I was thinking through a lot of different scenarios. Like, okay, so we have this little rover or space capsule. and we just load it in, and then when it gets full, it takes off, goes back to Earth, lands in the ocean. There it is. Do we need to like bring it back? Would we cycle through the astronauts that are there? I guess how long do you think an astronaut could stay on the moon for a mining operation before they would have to come back?
I really don't know. I don't know about that exactly, but I do know that we're working on and talking about like it uh, I mean currently actually working towards keeping a human on the surface for a lunar day, which is going to like an entire lunar day and night cycle, which would be a month effectively, a month on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the kind of initial, at least sustained presence. But I think that it would, the intention is for it to be longer.
Do you think that we need to establish a lunar base before we establish a Martian base?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's so much that we need to practice on the moon first. The moon is there's so many reasons. I mean, first of all, it takes about 3 days to get to the moon. Um, Whereas getting to Mars, the closest or the shortest amount of time would be 6 months, and that's provided that the Earth and Mars are lined up right. So if you're going to have any sort of mishaps that are going to occur, there's a way better chance that you can get your humans back to Earth in time, where compared to the moon. I mean to Mars. Um, Also, I think that psychologically there could be a toll, especially in the beginning, on human beings leaving their home planet. And If the moon, with Earth being at least in their view, or maybe with I mean, if I guess if astronauts are working on the far side, they may lose this, but at least in the beginning, I would think that our bases would be near side bases, and astronauts would still be able to at least see their home and recognize it as their home. Whereas you start working on the lunar far side, you're never going to see your home, and that's going to be kind of weird. And then going to Mars, the Earth is going to become completely unrecognizable. All you can do is point at it, that some kind of bluish star, and say, "Hey, that's my home planet." I think that I feel like that would have a psychological toll that might not really be appreciated yet. So it's something that I think is worth exploring and testing, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a multifaceted experience when you think of all that. Like it's not common for people to go to the moon, so we haven't necessarily dived into all the nuance that's present there.
Yeah. And I mean, also in addition, the moon does have a lot of resources for us to use, and it's much cheaper to get these things like oxygen and water off of the lunar surface than it is to get it off of the Earth's surface, at having only 1/6 the gravity that the Earth does. So it would be easier for us to be getting these resources that are imperative for us to go to Mars with, from the moon, rather than trying to get them all off of the Earth.
Hmm. So psychologically, do you think that we should invest in like space pups, space kittens,
I think that's awesome. I like that idea.
be present on those missions?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'm sure NASA would not go for that. Too much of a risk in so many ways, But but that would probably be actually psychologically a great thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that would.
I have 3 dogs myself, so yeah, they are my sanity.
Yeah, it would be a wild card. I would want to be present when the dogs experience zero G for the first time and just see how they react to it.
Well, I wonder actually if because the Russians, they sent dogs into space. I wonder if any of the readings they got might have said anything about what the dog was. I don't know. Their heart rate's going to be high. They're going to be
Yeah.
panting a lot. What are you going to do? Tell if they're scared or if they're just having a hard time breathing.
Mhm. Yeah, like do you think it would take generations of dogs to get used to that? Or do you think a single generation?
Oh, I think a dog could get used to zero G pretty quick, actually. I mean, their dogs are incredibly adaptable, and I mean, cats too, I'm sure, actually. Cats would probably, yeah, cats would be fine. I think they would be fine. It's, they're like, you can see how easily they get used to having 3 legs, for instance, or I've seen dogs that have to be in wheelchairs and they pick it up pretty quick.
Hmm.
I think they could figure that out. But it would be all the resources we would have to be giving to dogs and not that are not going to humans that I think would become this big sticking issue.
So I just imagine you're on the surface of the moon, you're playing fetch with your dog, and the dog bounds too greatly with too much force and just goes off into space.
Not on the moon.
No?
No, on an asteroid that's a legitimate concern. Yeah, but on the moon, no, dog wouldn't jump off the moon.
Hmm. So
I mean,
that's
it could go a pretty good distance, but it wouldn't leave the moon.
mhm. So even with the decreased gravity, a human couldn't just escape
Mm-mm.
the moon's
No,
gravitational force.
no, not
That
not even Michael Jordan.
that's comforting to know. Okay, so you're saying even if you like threw a ball straight up into the air, would it would come back on the moon?
Yeah, it would come back. I mean, even the golf ball that I believe was CERN and hit a golf ball. I'm sure that thing landed back on the moon's surface somewhere. I wonder if they've
Wow.
ever tried to look for it.
That'd be like a needle in a haystack, I would feel like.
Indeed, because it's like it's already like pitted itself, just look like every other lunar rock out there.
So have we sent humans to the dark side of the moon?
No, we haven't. In fact, so China is the first to land something on the dark side of the moon, and
And that
not
was
only did they land it, something they're roving around too. It's incredible. Yeah, and Bereshit was going to be the first to land on near a pole, and they came so close, so incredibly close as Israel's mission. They came so close, and then it was just sort of like at the last few seconds they lost communication. Unfortunately, that would have been amazing. But I mean, it still is amazing because they got so close.
Hmm.
Russia
So
was the first to actually Russia was the first to observe the far side and mapped and took images and mapped it. And so actually a lot of the far side features are named after Russian things. We have Mare Moscoviense, which is the Sea of Moscow. There's a really famous crater called Tsiolkovsky, and a bunch of other places.
hmm. So bringing it back to the Outer Space Treaty, are those names nationally recognized? I know scientists collaborate across national and governmental borders, but is it fair to be able to name those things?
I think so. Yeah, at least that's the precedent anyway. So yes, those are internationally recognized. Those are official names. Mare Moscoviense, all the far side names, and as well, China has named some features where they landed on the near side and on the far side. I don't know if it has gone through the International Astronomical Union's approval thing, or they have like a they actually decide, what things are named or approve whether things are named, which is they are the ones responsible for Pluto becoming a dwarf planet. Um, and so I don't know if they have actually done that yet, but I'm sure that they will approve what China names those places.
Hmm. There's so much. There's so much there. Like all of the, I just keep thinking about like how it, in recent history, I feel like there have been fewer and fewer invasive maneuvers by militaries. Like I feel like from history, what I've learned is that people are constantly invading and taking territory.
Mm,
And I guess I feel like space is going to be like that. Like it's going to induce this new savagery in humankind where we're going to get to the moon and then someone else is going to like attack us on the moon and try and claim the moon and go against the UN and that treaty.
right.
What like do you feel like that's going to happen, or that's not even a thought in your mind?
I mean, I guess I don't really think about it too much because it's the fact that this has been like sort of a renewed interest in the moon lately. And so that's already exciting enough that there's even an interest in it. And I don't think any what I think are like credible leaders, but I don't get in trouble for saying this, have that that have made any sort of statements with respect to carving out we own the moon or anything. I don't think any credible leaders have actually said that. And so again, I think what could be what might be the biggest sort of land grab danger might actually come from corporations. But at least I guess from the American sense, I don't have a good grasp on how corporations and government work in a lot of other countries. In China, for example, I mean, maybe it really would be like China, the Chinese government saying, no, we're interested in this because maybe they are closely networked enough with their companies that it would be the Chinese government. I'm just not that kind of savvy. But I think at least in the U.S. I mean, I do remember that during the, I think it was the 2012 elections or campaigns that Gingrich was claiming that he was going to be president of the moon. And
What? How did
yeah,
I miss this?
I remember he made some sort of a statement like, he wants to be president of the moon. And yeah, so, but no, that's just not
I need to look that up. That is hilarious. Oh man. Not even Elon Musk has said things like that about Mars or other. Wow. So, what does your research currently involve? What are you currently studying?
Yeah, so I still study space dew and lunar swirls.
Hmm.
I've actually been working with a few companies, commercial companies, helping out with like proposals that they might be, or that rather that they're intending to submit to some of the NASA programs, like the PRISM. The acronym is PRISM, and sorry, I cannot. I'm horrible like with telling you what it stands for, but it's about building instruments that would then be put on the CLIPS programs. CLIPS, I know, that's the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program. And so it would be, so instruments that we put on the CLIPS landers and rovers. So, and if you're not familiar with CLIPS, this is, again, it's Commercial Lunar Payload Services. And there were about, I think, 3 different calls where they were asking commercial companies to bid for providing the landing service, or the lander, the platform, lander and or rover that would bring these instruments to the lunar surface. So instead of NASA building these things, directly, if you will, even though NASA would actually be contracting like Lockheed or whatever, instead now they're asking for the commercial companies to be the ones going ahead, and they're coordinating the launch system, and they're having to deal with all of the configuration and proving that they will be able to handle configuration of all of these different instruments, what kind of communication capabilities they're going to have, and how they would actually be handling the communication. So it's where NASA's kind of taking like a bit of a step of a removal in some sense. And I think sort of the intention here is to help these companies get up to speed. This is the way I sort of see it, so that they would actually eventually be the ones who could just be doing it on their own without government support any longer. And it would become a commercial-based means of getting to the lunar surface, and then going from the lunar surface to Mars, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. When you say commercial companies, you're talking like Raytheon or Lockheed, not like Cadillac.
Right. Yeah. Although a lot of sort of new companies, or even existing companies that might be smaller, you might not have heard of much of, like Lockheed so yeah, I don't think there's any Cadillac ones, but probably Honeybee might have been one. Honeybee, I know, have made lunar habitats and other components and such. But there was a couple of new ones. There was one was called Moon Express. I think that I do not remember if they actually were funded, if they were selected. One called Astrobotic, they did get selected for one of the CLIPS missions.
Mm.
And it's interesting because I believe that, so now there's 3 missions that are planned. The first one being a lander, the second one, well, definitely the third one being a rover, and then I can't remember exactly the second one. They selected for the first ones, the lander, 3 companies that would be basically competing against each other. Each of them are getting funded, but they're competing against each other to be who would get there first. And then they get another like lump sum of money in the end if they are able to actually achieve that, be the first one.
Mm.
So it's kind of like a Google X Prize or something, except that it's from NASA and it's being a little pre-funded too.
Yeah. So these things are being rapidly developed and invested in.
Yeah, and actually that's a good point. Rapid, yes, they are. I believe that 2021. I think it might be the end of 2021, but is when the first lander has to go to the surface.
And is that where they're trying to keep an astronaut there for the lunar cycle?
Oh, these are just this is just robotic
Okay.
stuff. There's not the first. I don't think. I'm actually not sure how this is being done. I don't think that NASA is going to be reliant on the CLIPS program, at least, to bring humans to the surface. That might be considered too risky. I'm not sure, to be honest, because I'm not actually at a NASA center or anything. But we are NASA, however, is working on getting a human to specifically the South Pole, because that's what Vice President Pence said. Human, the first female and man to the South Pole of the moon by 2024. But I think that would be NASA is the one that's actually coordinating and doing that. And of course, NASA doesn't make most of its stuff. NASA doesn't make. It does contract out to other companies. It's just that NASA would still be the one putting everything together and doing the
Right.
infrastructure and organization.
Additional quality control.
Mm-hmm. Whereas for the CLIPS programs, it's like, okay, it's at the responsibility now of the commercial companies to do all that, prove that they can do it.
So the only other question that I have in my mind is going back to the psychological impact, like we talked about space pups and having animals there to help astronauts make it through. I saw the new SpaceX uniforms, and I want to preface this by saying that I'm asking you this because you're a lunar and a moon expert, and I'm curious about your opinion, not the fact that you're a woman.
Okay.
But I'm really curious, do you think it's important for fashion, like everything all considered, should just be practical, or do you think for the psychological aspect it's important to have that design aesthetic?
I think at least initially it's just for the practicality. I don't think the design. I think the design aesthetic is. I'm sure that some of the engineers of the spacesuits might be considering that to some extent, and there's nothing wrong with that. But certainly, I don't think that any astronaut would be like, "Oh, I wish this looked prettier," you know. Not at this point, anyway.
Uh-huh.
But maybe eventually, if there was different companies making different spacesuits and such, then that might become a thing.
All right, George, thank you. Can people follow your research? Can people keep up with you socially?
I don't really have, I'm like the worst social media person. I don't have a Facebook page. I have a Twitter account, but I don't do anything with it. So like every once in a rare while, I'll go there. Like, for instance, I did actually go to my Twitter account because this was like, I think about a year ago now, or close to a year ago now. Donald Trump had tweeted something about, this was after Pence had already made this, yeah, we're going to the moon, we're going to putting humans on the South Pole thing. He had tweeted something like, why are we going to the moon? We shouldn't go to the moon. We should just go to Mars. Anyway, the moon and Mars are the same thing. It was some ridiculous, very weird thing that he had tweeted.
Oh,
And, but I was prompted to go and respond or about it because he capitalized moon twice. And I'm very happy about that. So that's what I tweeted. Hey, at least he capitalized moon.
right. Well, thank you, George. I really appreciate this, and
Thank
I've
you. It's fun.